I looked up a couple stats about the Eagles practice facilities. That auditorium where they have the big announcements, there's 189 seats in that auditorium. The weight room is 8,000 square feet. As I watch the program Hard Knocks, and I see that they're building an indoor facility for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I'll start by asking this. John McMullen, when are the Eagles going to pave over part of that parking lot and build a bigger indoor bubble so everybody can fit around?
Yeah, it's always interesting because the timing of these things, and it's when people get to see the Star in Frisco, which is the Dallas Cowboys' new facility, and then there's going to be a new one in Eagan, Minnesota for the Vikings. People keep building these things, and they get better and better. And then, at one time, the NovaCare complex was state-of-the-art. It's no longer state-of-the-art. So it's kind of tough when you stand still for a while, and the fact that the Pete Thompson Memorial Practice Bubble, that's what I'm going to name it. It's not even 100 yards, so it's difficult, especially this time of year when you still have 90 players, a little bit less because the Eagles cut 3 guys, but you have so many bodies jammed in there. It's difficult to get your work accomplished on a rainy day.
Don't name it after me, and certainly not Memorial. I still want to be around.
That's a good point.
You can name it the Butch.
I don't want to put the dirt on you too soon.
You can name it the Butch Bachanico bubble because that was the best joke I think I've ever seen in my decade or 12 to 14 years of covering the team. Remember Butchie, the security guy, got the penalty. The referee ran into him and they threw a flag. And so then the next practice was inside and they used the training tape to mark off a square and they made Butch stand in that for the entire 2-hour practice. It said Butch in tape on the ground and he had to stand there for the 2 hours. Anyhow, we're talking with John McMullen, our 97.3 ESPN insider. You talk about the roster, a couple guys getting cut. Well, certainly last night about 8:20 in our email, it was a surprise to me. I think it was probably a surprise to most people that follow this football team. Jon Dorenbos traded for a 7th-round pick in 2019 to the Saints. Your reaction to Jon Dorenbos on the move?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing the impact he had on the Philadelphia sports community. I mean, the tweets about a long snapper. Normally, in a normal NFL city, nobody knows who the long snapper is, but John kind of transcended really the Eagles themselves and became a bit of a star because of America's Got Talent and obviously his work as a magician. And there were so many people upset by the trade. It was kind of amazing to me. And then you have, as you mentioned, you have the release, and you have the owner of the football team chiming in on the trade of a long snapper. Not to mention, obviously, the de facto GM and Howie Roseman and the head coach. I mean, John's a 37-year-old guy, and he's coming off an injury, a wrist injury that needed surgery. And by all indications, Rick Lovato outperformed him throughout the summer. And that's just the nature, obviously, of the NFL. It's a young man's game. The Eagles get 13 years younger at the position. They got to pay the guy less, and they get a draft pick on top of it. And from John's aspect of it, he gets to continue his career most likely because, obviously, the Saints are giving up a draft choice for a long snapper. And, by the way, both Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie said, hey, as soon as you're done playing, please come back and be a part of this organization. It's kind of amazing the impact Jon Dorenbos had on Philadelphia.
John, Scott here. I kind of wanted to parlay that a little farther and ask you, I know some fans were upset with the move of Jon Dorenbos, with the trade. Players tend to understand, obviously, that this is a business and there's things that go on related to that. Now, he was such a huge locker room guy, and that's the part of the whole thing that I was telling Pete earlier that I think that they're going to have a hard time replacing. What does this do to the locker room, if anything?
Yeah, Malcolm Jenkins kind of talked about that today after practice, and you're right, Scott. I mean, it goes farther than that. Doug Peterson described it today. There's things he said. There's things he loves about the NFL, and there's things he hates about the NFL. And the business side of it is what he hates. And if you think about what a locker room guy Jordan Matthews was, and now you have another one in Jon Dorenbos, at some point you got to weigh that and how it's going to affect the football team. Everybody knows it's a business, but it's more of an impact by that. There's still a lot of guys. Chris Long is one they've added who's become, I think, a leader already. So that's always something you got to weigh. But the reality is, it's about performance, and if you think you can get better, that's the harsh reality of the NFL.
Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the mystery man, Nick Foles. I was watching Twitter earlier today, and a bunch of reporters were, tweeting out that, they were in the practice bubble and he wasn't there. He was a noticeable absence. Now, I know Doug Peterson said that he was ill, but I also got the sense you guys got kicked out of that bubble pretty quickly. Tell me about what that was like.
Yeah, we got kicked out. We had about 3 minutes. It was interesting because it's usually only this time of year. It's only 15 to begin with because you get in the regular season mode. So people have to realize we don't get to watch the entire practice any longer. Just basically some stretching and a few individual things, and that's it. And you're ushered out. But today, and it was raining, they didn't open the doors to the practice bubble. And 3 minutes out. So I think there's some conspiracy theorists that are thinking we noticed Nick Foles, but it had nothing to do with that. It was just a miscommunication. But nonetheless, the fact that Nick hasn't been there, he's not going to play a down in the preseason. And this elbow issue goes back to last year in Kansas City. The Eagles keep denying it, but there's got to be some concern at some level. And both Doug Peterson and Frank Reich said they have so much confidence in his knowledge of the offense that they're comfortable with him as the backup quarterback if he's healthy by week 1. But what evidence is he going to be healthy? Because it's been stop and start. He'll go out and practice 2 days, for instance, when he came back, and then he's shut down again. He practiced yesterday, and now he's out with an illness. We have to take the Eagles at their word, but the bottom line is you're going to go into a regular season game, in theory, according to the Eagles. The backup quarterback has not played one down in the preseason. He's barely practiced. And I asked Doug about his philosophy about keeping 2 or 3 quarterbacks. He sure didn't sound like he wanted to keep 3. So that would lead you to indicate Matt McMullen's probably not going to be here. Carson Wentz played 16 games last season, missed a handful of snaps. I think it was 6 total. You got to cross your fingers and hope that's the case again this year.
Well, that would kind of lead into my next. I got to believe, like you said, there's concern about Foles. I got to believe there's also frustration growing as to when and if and what he can do when he gets out there. Do you believe that Nick Foles will be the backup quarterback this season, or is there a chance that at some point, depending on what happens with all these cuts and who gets dropped from other rosters, that maybe somebody else is where they go?
Well, I think there's a chance that he's not healthy, and at some point the Eagles shut him down. If he's healthy, he's going to be the backup quarterback. I don't think there's any question about that. Doug has tremendous respect for him, and this is what he wants, the plan moving forward. So it's totally about his health, and that's the only thing it's contingent upon. But obviously, if he's not able to go, I don't get the feeling the Eagles would be comfortable with Matt McMullen in that type of situation. So I think if we're talking about injured reserve at some point, and this elbow issue is much more serious than the Eagles have led on to this point, then I think you start thinking about looking outside the organization. To date, though, they have been very, very consistent and said they're being cautious. It's not a big deal. And basically they put Foles in bubble wrap. And we'll see September 10th. If he's the backup quarterback on September 10th, that's probably the truth.
We're talking with John McMullen on 97.3 ESPN.com Eagles Insider. You can follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. John, you're talking about the backup quarterback, but right now the Eagles are going into this fourth preseason game trying to shore up a lot of different backup positions. And Peterson kept bringing up the topic of, well, it's next man up, when they were asking him at the presser about Dorenbos and other guys. So obviously this fourth preseason game, while you're not going to see any starters, there is kind of seems to be a little bit more weight on this fourth preseason game in terms of finalizing this roster, especially considering they're cutting from 90 to 53 and not the gradual cut down.
Yeah, I mean, I think it gives some of those back-end guys another chance to really make a splash and catch somebody's eye. But in all reality, I mean, this has been going on, remember, since rookie camp and OTAs and mini camp and throughout training camp. By and large, the coaches on this team know who they like, who's going to make this football team. And it's basically already cast for them. I guess there's a chance. I always go back to the Tim Tebow, Matt Barkley game a couple of years ago where Tebow performed so well in the fourth preseason game, and everybody was like, he made the team, and they're not going to go with Barkley. And the end was they cut them both. Because they made up their mind on each. And for motions, the Eagles coaches know the way they want to go. And the waiver wire is going to be a big deal because, as you mentioned, there's no cut from 90 to 75. It's 90 to 53 this year. So there's going to be a flood of bodies on the street once you get down to that 53, and that's where you'll see some every year. You see guys picked up on waivers, and that's where I think the decisions and the difficult decisions really come.
John, Carson Wentz, I believe, completed 16 passes in the preseason, and we know we're not going to see him Thursday. How prepared do you believe he is for week one? Do you think he should have maybe played more last week?
Well, I would have liked to have seen him more, and I say that about any young quarterback. But you do have to remember the Eagles had the joint practices with the Dolphins, so it was a little bit different from the normal Week 3 preseason. So the starters got a lot of reps during the week with the Dolphins starters, and they considered that similar work, even though it wasn't a fully live environment. And that's how Doug explained why he limited some of the playing time. But there's also the philosophy of the NFL in general. It's not just the Eagles. It's all around the league where you see starters playing less and less in the preseason, and coaches have kind of weighed their options since the 2011 CBA, where they scaled back practices to such a drastic degree. So I think a lot of coaches believe you can't get the proper preparation you want anyway, so try to get to week one as healthy as possible. And I think that is the Eagles' philosophy, and it goes, as I said, far further than Philadelphia. I think it's a lot of organizations' philosophies now. Just get to week one as healthy as possible.
I guess kind of to wrap up everything here, as you look at the Eagles, they've made some moves this preseason. They brought in Darby. They brought in Dexter. They've traded Dorenbos. Do you get the sense that maybe Howie's done, or do you believe there could be another move or two in terms of trades that Howie Roseman may make?
I think Howie loves the trades, and he probably should have gone into Major League Baseball or the NBA where there's more of a trading environment, because he loves to move the chess pieces. I certainly think there's a chance for another trade. I certainly believe the Eagles will pick up one or two bodies on the waiver wire once the final cut downs are made. He just seems to enjoy making moves and doing things, and getting draft picks for 37-year-old long snappers. There's not a lot of GMs that can do that, so you have to give him credit from that perspective. But on the other hand, if you want to be negative about it, you can say come on, is this overkill? Are you going too far? I don't know. I think the Eagles have improved. I think the Darby move is as difficult as it is to give up Jordan Matthews. That was such a position of need, and you have to give something to get something. Generally, I think all of Howie's moves have made some sense. Right down to the Dorenbos one, because as I said, he got a draft pick, he saved some money, and he got 13 years younger at the position. So it makes sense.
John McMullen also covers the NFL for FanRag Sports. John, go looking around the NFL. So the reports coming out, the Broncos are considering trading veteran safety TJ Ward. I remember when they signed him back in 2014, it was a big deal. Wow, they really upgraded their secondary. They got a hard hitter out of it. They won a Super Bowl with the guy, and now they're trying to get rid of him in his last year of his contract.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that is kind of going throughout the NFL, and you can look at it right here in Philadelphia and see it. Jim Schwartz talks about it all the time. I mean, hard hitters, and you're right, that's TJ Ward, they're not as valuable as they used to be because you can't hit guys hard. And if you do, you're going to get flagged, and they're trying to take the intimidator out of the game by and large. So I think if you look at the safety position, and I point to the Eagles locker room, where just about every safety they have, Malcolm Jenkins, Corey Graham, Jalen Watkins, even Rodney McLeod has cornerback in his background. They're all coverage guys, and they're all cornerbacks turned into safety. The days of that big, strong safety in the middle of the field just stopping wide receivers from even wanting to go over the middle to try to catch the football, it's gone. They've taken it out of the game. So players like TJ Ward just aren't as important as they once were.
John Harbaugh, the Ravens, confirmed today that Joe Flacco is finally resumed throwing at practice, and he went on the guarantee, John, that Joe Flacco will be ready in time for the season opener. Seems to be like a pretty getting a little bit far ahead of ourselves, aren't we, after a guy who basically missed all of training camp and the entire preseason due to a back problem that we're still pretty much unsure, John, what was going on with the 6'6" quarterback.
Now, yeah, I mean, there were reports it was a herniated disc, and nobody really knows, though,
right,
because you don't have to report things in the preseason as far as the injury report goes. And even as they get to the week one injury report, it'll just be listed as back. So, but the Ravens, the concern from the Ravens standpoint is they originally tried to spin it as a 1 week injury, and then it started lingering and lingering and lingering. And we all know with back injuries how they can crop up. With Tony Romo is a perfect example. So I think there's a lot of concern because the Ravens season is basically done. If Joe Flacco can't play, but I think Harbaugh and Doug Peterson may have compared notes, because with Doug, with Nick Foles, and John with Joe Flacco, no, don't worry about it. They'll be there week one, and hey, we'll see if both of them are there week one.
There's reports out there that, John, that Joe Hayden could be traded by the Browns, arguably one of the 10 best corners in the league at this point. He's going to be making about $11 million this year. Who are the teams out there that, if they do call about him, you think would be most interested in him?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be difficult because of the salaries you mentioned. And Joe's got a big reputation, as you mentioned. I think that's the thought process. He's such a good corner, but he hasn't played that way really over the past calendar year. He hasn't played up to his reputation. So you have that. I think he's looked at as sort of a descending player. You have the big contract. And then you talk about, why – it's the same thing to a much lesser degree with Ronald Darby, because Ronald doesn't make a lot of money. He's still on his rookie contract. But it's a good question. You ask yourself, why in the world in a quarterback deficient league are the Buffalo Bills trading Ronald Darby? It's a legitimate question. And you say the same thing. Cleveland Browns are a bad football team. if Joe Hayden's a top 10 corner, why in the world are they trying to get rid of him? The answer is he hasn't been. He's not. He's not any longer. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult for them to spin him off.
John, of course, we can't go on a national conversation without the Matthew Stafford $135 million contract. The interesting thing about it, John, is that they have a lot of money wrapped up in the signing bonus, allowing them to have a much lower number on the base salary for a couple of years. It seems like the Lions did a pretty good job, John, of not compromising their salary cap while trying to give their quarterback, who's given them a lot of stability at the quarterback position, a nice chunk of change as maybe a little thank you and hope we stay here for a while.
Yeah, I mean, that's just what it is. Matthew Stafford's a really, really good quarterback. No, he's not an elite quarterback, but that's the nature of NFL business. That's the cost of doing business in this league at that position. He's the highest paid player in the NFL right now because it's timing and it's circumstance. And he'll only be the highest paid player till the next guy is up, as evidenced by Derek Carr, who didn't even get to one regular season game as the highest paid player in NFL history. So as you can see by certain teams, the New York Jets, first off, with Josh McCown and the fact that they were trying to spin that Christian Hackenberg could possibly compete for that job. You think about the Cleveland Browns going with Sean Kaiser. You think about even the Denver Broncos going with Trevor Siemian over Paxton Lynch. San Francisco. San Francisco actually game plan in week 3 of the preseason against the Vikings to get Brian Hoyer some confidence against a good defense. That's how poor things are out there. So my point here is if you don't have a quarterback in this league, you're obviously chasing your tail. And most of the teams in this league would love to have Matthew Stafford. So that's $27 million a year. It never goes down. It keeps going up, and he deserves it. I mean, he is a very, very good quarterback.
He's John McMullen, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider, also national NFL columnist for FanRagSports.com. John, I know you and Josh talked about the John Harbaugh extension yesterday. We had Brian Baldinger on earlier talking about Dorenbos, so I guess I'll close where we started with Dorenbos because Baldy brought up something I hadn't really considered, that the Eagles think so much of him. Maybe he could come back as a special teams coach at some point in time. You think John Dorenbos could be an NFL coach in some capacity?
Well, as I said, the Eagles basically asked him to come back when he's done to be a part of the organization. I don't think he would certainly start at that level. Maybe an assistant special teams coach. You kind of got to go through the grind and go through the process of doing it. Plus, you have to figure out where the Eagles are with Dave Sipp. Dave Sipp is one of the best 2 or 3 special team coaches in football. So I can say he's not going to take his job as long as he's here. But sure, I mean, if he wants to do it. The thing about John, though, remember, John makes a good living with his magic. Mm-hmm. And I could see him going out to Vegas and doing a show and leaving football behind. So a lot of it depends on what he wants to do.
Well, what we want to do is wrap up the interview, but we do know that we enjoy visiting with you each day at this time, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow. It's Eagles and Jets, the final preseason game, Thursday night, 7 o'clock, right here on 97.3 ESPN. The pregame starts at 6. We'll get more Eagles-related news and NFL news from you tomorrow at this time. Thanks, Johnny Mac.
Hey, thank you, guys.